been a lot of debate, hasn't there, about this report that came out in the Hollywood Reporter, basically saying that Meghan was a bad boss, 5 a.m. emails, that she was a bit of a kind of devil wears Prada kind of boss.
There was one quote saying that she was a demon in high heels. Yeah. We present our latest episode hot on the heels of breaking news overnight that Big Boris says...
When has he been known as Big Boris?
When has he ever not been Big Boris?
Big dog.
That Boris Johnson is coming out with a new book, and front page of a few papers is being serialised in the Daily Mail, and it's emerged that he gave, not very successfully, a pep talk to Harry in January 2020, trying to persuade him not to leave the UK and not to depart these shores. Now, let's set the scene.
Boris Johnson was Prime Minister at the time. This is before he stepped down last year.
It's January 2020. Harry and Meghan have recently said they're off. They want to go and pursue financial freedom, some independence. And they have set out their story and said, we want to do, if we can, a half in, half out, move to America, be commercial, but also do some royal duties.
Yeah.
Early in January, Harry is here for the Sandringham Summit. So him, Prince William, the then Prince of Wales, now the King, Her late Majesty, all their private secretaries gather around a table at Sandringham and try and thrash out a deal. Harry's half in, half out template.
No, that's in the bin.
It's in the bin. The Queen and the rest of the royal family say it's a negative ghostwriter.
Yeah.
So it looks like he's off. At the time, Meghan is in Canada. They've been in Canada for a couple of months with their young son Archie, and Harry has come back for the summit.
She was going to be zooming in, wasn't she, on the telephone or on kind of video link? Vetoed. But in the end, that was vetoed.
That was vetoed.
But that's the background to it.
That's the background. So that negotiation has not gone Harry's way, and so we're at the UK Africa Summit. Trade summit, and Harry's there. It's one of his last royal engagements as an official royal. But what is fascinating here,
who could save the day,
is this last ditch attempt by what Boris says was both Downing Street and Buckingham Palace asking him to do it. So I find that bit really fascinating, because even though conversations have failed to reach what Harry wanted, and they've put their foot down, the royal family, they are still thinking that Boris, who wasn't known to have a particularly close relationship with Prince Harry, could persuade him to stay.
With the gift of the gab. But I know what I think is really surprising about this one is that it quotes a friend of Boris saying, it was a man-to-man conversation. They were totally alone, but Harry wasn't for turning. He was unpersuadable by that point. Boris succeeded in delivering Brexit, but even he couldn't stop Megxit. And the most surprising thing, that Boris has a friend left to deliver such a quote. I'm surprised by that.
I liked the quote from the friend that said it was totally hopeless.
Yeah. I mean, less of a friend.
I think the strategy here is interesting in that
it's not the first time that a politician's been deployed in such a way. We saw John Major, who helped in the aftermath of Princess Diana.
He was known to have had a much stronger bond with the Queen and members of the royal family. They trusted him. He was seen as sort of a wonderful diplomat in terms of managing human relationships. Sending Boris crashing in to try and do a last-minute clean-up job with Harry I don't know.
Strikes me as a desperation. If recollections may vary on this.
Well, at the time, there were reports that they had what were described by officials as behind closed doors.
There was a meeting.
Yeah.
We've got a picture of them at the summit just before they went into the kind of the room where there was no reporters, there were no cameras in there. So something happened, something was said.
Well, it was so successful that Harry left the next day.
Harry left.
The very next day.
And
well done,
it's all gone not brilliantly well after that, has it?
Well, it's been mixed, hasn't it? But we have been seeing actually this very week the fruits of Harry's labours since leaving the royal family.
Yeah.
He's been in New York during the UN Hunger Week. He's been doing lots of very high profile, what should have been very high profile engagements. We talked a little bit last week. We were looking forward to him doing the plenary session with young changemakers at the Diana Awards, which he did on Monday. We also saw him at the Clinton Foundation talking about mental health, and
The Parent Network, which he set up.
His Parents Network,
Yes,
exactly. And he was getting out his phone and
I thought that was really powerful because we had a week where we talk about politicians versus royal family again. We had a week where we had Labour conference in Liverpool and some quite sort of hackneyed speeches. I think they were very stilted, very wooden. Meanwhile, you've got Harry on stage in New York, and I thought, hands down, he did a really brilliant job. He looked relaxed. He looked quite nervous that first day.
Yeah.
The second day, he kind of got into his groove at the Clinton event. And he got out he had a microphone in one hand, he had his mobile phone in another, and he said, "Who's on your lock screen?" "It's my kids." What's yours? What's your lock screen? And then behind him were all those images of all the children who died as a result of either being bullied online or, self-harm through access to social media content that their parents had no idea what was going on in some instances. And he was sort of railing against those big companies saying, we need to take action for the sake of our children. And it was so powerful. It was so brilliantly worded speech and really well delivered. And I thought, yes, Harry, that's what you should be doing. That's exactly what you should be doing.
It reminds me a little bit, and I'm not sure how much Prince Harry will enjoy this comparison, but it does remind me of a few years ago when Prince William was taking on big tech and the social media giants like Facebook and Instagram with his cyberbullying task force. And
he made that comment, didn't he, after Molly Russell died?
Yeah.
The 14-year-old from London, she died as a result of, self-harm and harmful online content. And William gave a very powerful statement at the Times, reaching out to Ian Russell, her father, and saying that this should not be happening.
Yeah.
Like, how do we stop
Big
this?
Tech kind of ignored William. The problem was he did a lot of convening, and they all came to Kensington Palace and they would come and have tea with him. But when the task force did all its work and its research and presented some potential guidelines that could be, introduced across big tech, they all just said no thanks. And then he went to the Google headquarters in London. I remember going and sort of blasted them all because he was cross and angry. And I think that was one of the first times that William felt that his position had not had the impact that he had wanted it to. But it did remind me
the frustration.
The two brothers do
They're
share
on the
this.
same. Yeah, they're on the same page with this. Yeah,
they are on the same page. But Harry was out in New York doing his thing. Meghan wasn't there, and he's been involved in a few events. But that is not, unfortunately for Harry, this week what has been taking up the headlines here.
Not all of the headlines, no.
Not all of the headlines. So
there's been a lot of debate, hasn't there, about this report that came out in the Hollywood Reporter, basically saying that Meghan was a bad boss. 5 a.m. emails, that she was a bit of a kind of devil wears Prada kind of boss.
There was one quote saying that she was a demon in high heels.
Yeah, a Duchess difficult. She was called.
The narrative being from this Hollywood Reporter piece, which was, they claim, very well sourced. They said they'd spoken to 12 people, including one employee still there, very high up, working for Harry and Meghan. And
which I'd be very surprised if someone was still in with an NDA on the phone to Hollywood Reporter, but that's what they're saying.
Well, what's interesting, they then gave an interview to Access Hollywood, didn't they, standing by. What it has prompted is 2 weeks now of claim and counterclaim, because this week, after that Hollywood
Reporter,
it's gone
on and on. Yeah.
We've had I think, extraordinary
riposte
piece appear in Us Weekly, where named employees, current employees, former employees of Harry and Meghan's, have gone on the record to rebut these claims. We've had Josh Kettler, the former chief of staff, Harry's chief of staff, who left after 3 months, saying his time with them was, warm and interesting. We have Ashley Hansen, their global press secretary, who works for both of them, saying, giving extraordinary examples, very personal examples, saying she went and had surgery and Meghan was in touch with her husband daily to see what she needed.
Though I'm not sure I would want, daily phone calls from the boss if I was
we had
recovering from surgery.
Another member of staff saying they just mentioned to Meghan in passing that, they got a new dog, and the next day a luxury dog lead arrived on their doorstep. Another employee saying, I mentioned to Meghan that my skin was bothering me, and she put together a skincare gift. So that.
Yeah, an element saying, there's no 5 a.m. emails like that. She doesn't work like that. In fact, on the bottom of her email, on the bottom of her email signature, it says, my working hours may not be your working hours. So this idea that, I get it. We can have flexible lives. We can, I might not be getting back to you in the time that you think is available. But
what's interesting about that strategy is it just, I see that they wanted a sort of strong riposte, But it has just kept the story running because we then.
It also shows you where the pinch points are,
Yes.
what they're really upset about, and what they're worried about. And they thought, I can't let this slide. You know, they've had a lot of negative publicity over the years. Some of the stuff they've sort of brushed off, but this obviously really hits at something that they really feel they've got to put a line in the sand and say, no, this isn't right.
I think,
but then
I think that's because
the other side comes back.
I think that's because, you know, you and I both remember my former colleague Valentine Lowe's huge scoop that there were allegations of bullying at the Palace of Staff, which Meghan has always strenuously denied, and we must clarify that. And Buckingham Palace did then commission a law firm to do a investigation and report into working practices, and which
has never seen the light of day, and probably never will.
The only thing we saw, which was mentioned in the Sovereign Grant report the following year, was that there was something in the HR kind of terms that had been changed that reflected possible sort of change in working practices. But my point being, I think Harry and Meghan's camp would always have wanted to kind of go, well, that was, and they said, the lawyer said at the time, that was a smear campaign by the Times. UK press smear campaign came out just before their Oprah interview. And I think they always felt they wanted to keep that firmly in the UK press. But this, the Hollywood Reporter, which is widely respected in the industry in which Harry and Meghan are now working in out there, that I think is more problematic for them. And I think that's
because of where it was, they felt they needed to,
and that's why we
have that comeback.
But then we've had another piece in the Daily Beast since come out with more claims. So I just question whether or not, the counterclaim and riposte is actually doing them any favours or just keeping the story rumbling. I
think it would have hurt them at a time when Harry has genuinely had a good week, and we're going to see him in London at the Well Child Awards on Monday. It's a time when he, this is his thing. Yeah. And the idea that this is coming up again, which essentially they will see as a kind of an old story that they'd hoped to have put to bed, all the allegations coming back, that painting Meghan as this sort of demon. And also she's busy building her secret project. She's busy building her lifestyle brand, her American Riviera Orchard. There's going to be a big TV show next year with Netflix. So they won't be wanting that to infringe on her brand as this sort of wholesome, mother and creative person who's living this amazing life in Montecito, because that doesn't tally with what's coming from Hollywood Reporter. So I'm sure that's at play as well. They're thinking, hang on a minute, we need to put a stop to this.
Well, the front pages of the American tabloids this week and here have not been about Harry in New York talking about mental health. They have been about this. And I wonder how much that will bother Harry.
It's a shame. I think he says stuff like, instead of mental health, we should be talking about mental fitness, which I like that idea, because it's, rather than just taking it as wait till something bad happens, a sort of mental illness as such. We talk about keeping mentally fit so that you don't get mentally ill, I guess. But yes, I think that's really rattled some cages, hasn't it, in Montecito? But
moving on to the other camp, the Prince and Princess of Wales.
The Prince and Princess of Wales. Yes, it's been quite an interesting
we've had
week.
William has unveiled. Well, this was actually interesting. This was also in New York. The finalists of this year's Earthshot Prize.
Yeah, Harry was in New York. William was virtually there with his video.
Virtually came in. And this is, of course, the Earthshot Prize, which William launched a few years ago. It's a 10-year project.
4 years in.
We're 4 years in. This year's awards are going to be held in Cape Town in November. And there's some really interesting... There are 5 categories. There's build a waste-free world, protect and restore nature, clean our air, revive our oceans, and fix our climate.
Yeah.
And it does produce some really innovative,
that's right,
sometimes quite quirky projects.
So we've got 3 in each category, and they're all so mixed. So you've got people who are trying to protect antelope in Kazakhstan in the wilderness there. You've got people who are growing homemade algae in Scotland. That's going to be a new source of omega-3, which would then reduce the need to go fishing for salmon and fish to produce that omega-3, which is the only other place we get it from.
Is algae going to become as big an obsession for William as seaweed?
I hope so. There's some seaweed. There's some seaweed on the list.
How could there not be?
There are people who are, maintaining these sustainable seaweed farms that's going to rid the oceans of CO2. What are the other standout? I mean, they're all so unique. And I love this project because it's kind of building up this idea of let's just get these kind of sometimes wacky ideas sometimes kitchen table ideas where some genius has just come up with this new form of tech, or it's maybe a company that's starting out, a for-profit company, but it just needs a little bit more help to kind of link it to big business and get it off the ground in that way.
One of the I think really good things about Earthshot is that although in each category only one of the finalists wins in each category and gets £1 million to scale that up, all the people who are shortlisted get to go to these events and these sort of summits where they are mingling and put in touch with investors.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if you don't win the prize in your category, you are still, you are introduced.
You're still a winner.
You're introduced to a bigger network where you have much bigger opportunity to make that idea happen.
Yeah, exactly.
So
and we'll see more of that next week, aren't we?
Yes.
As he rolls some of those things out. And then that's what the summit's about as well, isn't it? It's like getting people together so they can introduce you in a kind of launch pad, in a kind of like blind date setting. So you can get the kind of innovators, the tech people, and then bring in the people who've got big money who can scale that project up. It's all about impact, isn't it, for the Prince?
Well, there's that one of the finalists from a couple of years ago, Nopla, is now making
I love Nopla.
all that extraordinary packaging, which is now being rolled out across football clubs.
Yeah, it's junk food packaging, but it's disposable, but it goes back to the...
It's not all junk food served at football grounds. Oh, we'll get in trouble there. But it's getting rid of all the plastic containers and replacing it with is it made from seaweed?
Are they having their kind of
is.
tofu poke bowls at football these days? Maybe I'm not in touch. I thought it was still burgers.
Pie and mash isn't necessarily junk food.
No.
Oh, discuss. That's a whole other episode.
But so this is interesting. When Harry opened his Parent Network speech at the Clinton event that we were talking about, he started talking about putting a man on the moon, astronauts on the moon, Russians and the Americans landing, taking the space race. And then he branched off into kind of social media and things like that, which I thought was slightly tangential. And then you had obviously William's Earthshot, which is based on JF Kennedy's Moonshot, which was the early 60s. President Kennedy said, right, we need to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. They did. Apollo 11 in 1969 did achieve that goal. And William's trying to do the same thing by saving the Earth within a decade, or certainly making kind of big gains. But I thought that was interesting that Harry chose to kind of draw on the space race and astronauts. Maybe I'm reading too much into it.
Was he doing a bit of brotherly borrowing there?
Maybe I'm reading too much into it.
Bit of brotherly borrowing.
It's a little secret,
Treading into your territory.
A little secret, wave to his brother.
Oh, you thought it was a big up to his brother?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Interesting.
Again, maybe just had too much time on my hands this week to think.
I don't believe that. So that's William. That's
William.
What William's been up to.
Yeah.
And Catherine.
Indeed.
We had our second in 2 weeks running court circular entry that she
spoiling us.
Yep. She had another meeting at Windsor Castle this week with some of her Royal Foundation team, some of her private office team for planning her carol service, which is one of the set pieces that she plans to host.
It's great.
As part of her light programme of duties and her sort of slow return to public work. But that will be
ITV
broadcast on Christmas Eve. It's always a treat. We get to go, which is lovely. And it's just a nice sort of signal that she's still feeling well and, planning that and looking forward to that. And it's something we always see the children there, don't we?
Yeah.
And the wider Middleton clan.
We're seeing more of this kind of come out. The action plan for the Princess of Wales kind of play out now, aren't we? These little kind of nuggets. Okay, she started to do this, she started to do that. We'll talk about the ballet later.
Yeah, we'll come on to that.
Which was very exciting last night. I think it was interesting as well. They went up to Balmoral without the children and had a weekend with the King and Queen. You do wonder what was discussed there. But that felt like a kind of step forward as well, going to church with the King and Queen shortly after the second anniversary of the Queen's funeral. It was just a few days after. It would have been 2 years since that.
They've been up there twice now in the last few weeks, haven't they?
They have, yeah. So I think it's all part of this kind of, the wheels turn slowly at the palace at the best of times. But I think obviously with her recovery, that's just taken to another level. But we are seeing the kind of action plan play out publicly. Also this week, there's been a story, not about what the royals are doing, but who pays for it.
why are we talking about this now? Because
Why are we talking about this
the sovereign
now?
grant report in June?
We
There's
did.
been something else, hasn't there?
There's been something else. So this has come from Republic, which is obviously people with an axe to grind.
Well, the name, it's in the clue's in the name.
Clue's in the name. Nothing gets past you, right?
No.
The anti-monarchist, they bang the drum for getting rid of the whole bunch of the royal family. What a waste of cash, blah-de-blah. They've produced a report of sorts,
What does it say?
They claim the royal family does not cost the public 86 million as per the sovereign grant, but actually the true figure they say is more likely to be £500 million a year.
Wow, fanfare.
Yes,
Gosh,
a lot of money. So they're taking the 86 million from the sovereign grant that the royal family get for their duties, public duties. They're adding in the cost to local councils when they go on royal engagements. They're adding in the cost of security. I think it's about 150 million, they reckon. Who knows? We've never been told. But that's part of the problem. They're saying that there isn't this transparency. So they've had to kind of guesstimate a lot of the numbers to come up this £500 million figure.
Right.
And they're saying there should be more transparency. In 2011, David Cameron and his Chancellor, George Osborne, reformed the method by which the taxpayer funds the monarchy. And out went the civil list, and in came the sovereign grant, which was calculated on a proportion of the profits from the Crown estate. As the Crown estate has got more profitable, so that percentage has come down to the royal family, but still, they look at getting a £45 million windfall over the next couple of years. That's going to go to help fund the restoration and resurfacing work of Buckingham Palace.
£370 million.
Yes, which has been paid for over this sort of decade.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting debate. It's one that always comes up. Critics refer to this one-way formula as a kind of gold ratchet, that they get this sort of slice of the Crown estate.
The funding is never going to go down. Is that the argument from Republic?
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, what was interesting in this report was that they said that, that should be scrapped and there should be a kind of just a one-off fee every year for the royal family. Yeah. And interestingly, they said
that King Charles should be paid £189,000 a year or something, the salary.
Which is more than the Prime Minister. So I'm not sure why the anti-monarchist group think that the King should be paid more than the Prime Minister. Anyway.
How do you think that would go down with the King?
It's all quite bad.
They told him he had a salary of £189,000 and that was it for the year, Your Majesty.
That's your lot.
That's your lot.
Don't know. It wouldn't go very far. It wouldn't fund the 2 new helicopters that they've got coming this year.
Maybe.
But no, it's an interesting point in terms of transparency. What the public is allowed to know, what the public isn't allowed to know. Some will argue that even if it was £500 million, that it's very good value for money. And Republic were underplaying the benefit that the country gets
from things like tourism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They said it's all been overblown. What do we really get from them anyway? What have the Romans ever done for us? Sort of approach to their report.
Well,
so, there was something there.
Something there from Republic.
Something to discuss.
Yeah, always.
But should we end on a nice?
I think let's.
Thing. Go on, Roya.
So
tell us what's been nice.
Well, late last night, we got a message from Kensington Palace on our WhatsApp group to say, heads up, just to let you know, the Princess of Wales this afternoon, as in Thursday afternoon, went to a matinee performance of Akram Khan's production with the English National Ballet at Sadler's Wells of Giselle. And she went privately, so it wasn't a sort of public engagement. And she enjoyed it so much that she's going to post about it. And then, sure enough, dropped onto their social media post was a personal message from Catherine, which read as follows. Congratulations and thank you to English National Ballet and Sadler's Wells for the wonderfully powerful, moving and inspiring performance of Akram Khan's Giselle. Creativity at its best. And it's signed with C. And what we've been told about this is that it's not a public engagement. It doesn't signal her return to public engagements, but as part of her recovery, things that bring her joy have been very important. So she's talked about the outdoors and nature, and we know Catherine is very into the arts and ballet and theatre and visual arts, and obviously an afternoon at the ballet, a very innovative performance, and Akram Khan is an extraordinary choreographer. I've seen quite a lot of his work. was a tonic for her soul.
Yeah, I think she was buzzing after that, wasn't she? And that's why she wanted to do that personal message.
I looked
I
online.
actually went to see them rehearse because I was
Yes, you
the
did.
Queen went to see these rehearse, and it's so moving, and the two principal dancers are incredible. They have this amazing chemistry, partly because they're married. So James Streeter and Arina Takahashi, and when they dance, it's absolutely spellbinding, and that's just in rehearsal. So what was it like on the?
Do you think maybe the Queen told her how wonderful it was?
I did wonder that at Balmoral, whether they were having that conversation at Balmoral, and she said, look, why don't you get down? Because the Queen's recently become a patron of the English National Ballet this year, and went to visit them for the first time, saw that rehearsal, and they were extraordinary, and I'm rather jealous.
Well, I looked as soon as we got that. I looked online to see if there were any tickets left because it ends on the 20th. It's sold out.
Sold out. Hello, press office for the English National
Hello
Ballet.
Hello.
I bet Keir Starmer's got some tickets.
Oh, I bet he's in a box. He's probably in a box.
Dagnammit. Okay.
Anyway, it would be a nice outing for the royals, wouldn't it?
Yes.
By which I mean us.
The royals.
By which I mean
it wasn't
us, Your Royal Highness.
Anyway, well, see you at the ballet.
See you at the ballet, love. Put your ballet slippers on and
slippers.
Yeah, ballet slippers.
They're called pumps.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. See you there. Toot toot.
Bye bye.